The rule of the universe emerges empire. In the vastness of the universe, beyond the reaches of known space, there existed a strange and an ancient rule. It was a rule spoken of in hushed whispers among the stars, one that everyone seemed to know but dared not speak aloud. The rule was simple, yet its consequences were profound. Never anger the humans. The story begins on a distant planet, where an alien species known as the Vasari lived. The Vasari were an ancient and wise civilization whose empire had flourished for centuries. They were known for their peace, their knowledge, and their ability to make alliances with countless species. Their empire stretched far and wide, and their influence was unmatched. The Vasari had learned over time that the universe was vast, filled with many species, each with its strengths and weaknesses. One such ambassador from the Vasari Empire, Korin, was given a delicate mission. Korin was young by Vasari standards, but he had risen through the ranks of his people's diplomacy. He was known for his confidence, his sharp mind, and his ability to negotiate with even the most difficult of species. His mission was to establish a peaceful trade agreement with Earth. Earth was a young planet in the grand scheme of the universe, and its people were still learning the ways of the stars. They had no empire of their own, no powerful fleet to dominate the galaxy. But the Vasari knew that Earth's position in the galaxy was crucial, and forming a relationship with Earth was vital for the continued success of the Vasari Empire. Korin arrived on Earth aboard his sleek, silver starship, a symbol of the Vasari Empire's power. As his ship touched down on the planet's surface, he marveled at the landscape. The Earth was different from other worlds he had visited. Its beauty was simple, but striking. The green hills, the clear skies, and the vast oceans gave the planet an inviting warmth. The Vasari had never encountered a world so full of life and energy. Korin stepped off the ship and was greeted by a human delegation. They were ordinary men and women, dressed in simple clothes. The human leader, a man named James Carver, welcomed Korin with a handshake and a warm smile. There was something strange about James. He seemed unassuming, almost ordinary, yet there was an undeniable power in his presence. Korin felt a twinge of discomfort but pushed it aside. This mission would be easy. The humans were just another species to deal with, like all the others. As the meeting began, Korin quickly realized that Earth's leaders were not like the others. They didn't speak in the flowery, diplomatic terms that the Vasari were used to. Instead, they were blunt, straightforward, and even a little confrontational. James Carver asked questions with a sharpness that Korin found unsettling. He couldn't help but notice that the humans seemed to be watching him, waiting for him to slip up. Korin had dealt with difficult negotiations before, but there was something about these humans that was different. They weren't afraid to challenge him, to question his motives, and to push back against his every word. He could sense their suspicion, their doubt, and their lack of fear. The Vasari ambassador had always been used to being in control, but here he was starting to lose his composure. Still, he remained confident. After all, the Vasari were the most powerful empire in the galaxy, and he was their ambassador. These humans were just children compared to his people. They didn't know the power of the stars or the weight of intergalactic diplomacy. He could win them over with ease. But then, something unexpected happened. James Carver, the human leader, looked Korin directly in the eyes and asked a simple question. Why do you want to make an alliance with us? What's in it for your people? Korin was taken aback. He had expected the usual pleasantries, the typical questions about trade and resources. But this question felt different. It felt like an accusation, a challenge to everything Korin had assumed about the humans. He tried to brush it off, but the words stuck in his mind. Why did the Vasari want to ally with Earth? Was it truly for mutual benefit, or was it something darker? Because, Korin began, his voice steady but unsure, we believe your planet has great potential. You have resources, you have promise. The Vasari can help you grow. James didn't nod or smile. He just stared at Korin with an intensity that made the Vesari ambassador uneasy. "You've never asked us what we need, have you?" James asked, his voice low but powerful. "You're only interested in what we can give you." Corin tried to regain control of the conversation, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing ground. The humans weren't responding like he expected. They weren't following the rules of diplomacy he was used to. They were unpredictable, and that unpredictability made Corin nervous. Then, just as Corin was about to speak again, another voice interrupted. It was a voice from the back of the room. A woman, one of the human advisors, spoke with calm certainty. "There's a rule in the universe that you should remember, Corin," she said. "A rule that applies to all species, no matter how powerful they are." Corin turned to look at her, his expression a mix of confusion and curiosity. "What rule?" "Never anger a human," the woman said. "Trust me, it's not a rule you want to break." Corin laughed. "Is that your threat?" "An ancient superstition. I'm a Vesari ambassador. I don't fear such things." But the woman's gaze didn't falter. "You will. You'll learn. All who break this rule do." Corin dismissed her words, but deep down, a feeling stirred within him. Could this be true? Were the humans really that dangerous? As the meeting continued, Corin couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had no idea then that this seemingly insignificant rule, the one that no one talked about, the one that everyone secretly feared, would soon change everything he knew about the universe. The decision to cross the line. Corin's discomfort continued to grow as the meeting unfolded. He had expected it to be straightforward, a simple negotiation between two civilizations, but something about the humans unsettled him. They were not like the other species he had dealt with. Their bluntness, their intensity, and the way they seemed to study him made him question his assumptions about them. Despite the warning from the woman in the back of the room, Corin's pride remained unshaken. He had come this far, and the Vesari Empire was built on strength, dominance, and control. The Vesari didn't back down. They made their own rules, and if the humans were too weak to understand that, then it was their problem, not his. He began to rationalize. The warning had come from one woman, one advisor. Perhaps she was just overly cautious. After all, the humans were still a young species, imperfect, inexperienced, and not accustomed to the vast power that the Vesari held. They could easily be manipulated into forming an alliance if he pushed the right buttons. With renewed determination, Corin decided to take a more aggressive approach. He would push back against their mistrust and show them who was truly in charge. He would assert his authority, dominate the conversation, and leave them in awe of the Vesari Empire's power. The humans would be impressed by his confidence, and the deal would be done. Corin looked across the room at James Carver, the human leader. James had a calm demeanor, but Corin could see the fire in his eyes. James wasn't afraid. Corin could tell that much. But that didn't matter. He would break James' resolve and show him the true power of the Vesari. So, with a sharp, cold smile, Corin leaned forward and addressed the humans directly. "You know," he began, "the Vesari have spent centuries building our empire. We've made countless alliances, forged our influence across the galaxy. And yet, I come here and find that humans are so skeptical, so wary of us. It's almost as if you don't trust your betters." He paused for effect, watching their reactions carefully. James' expression remained neutral, but Corin noticed the tiny tightening around his eyes. He had struck a nerve. He pressed on, raising his voice just slightly, letting the tension build. "Perhaps you feel threatened by the Vesari. Perhaps you think that Earth deserves more than what it has earned. But I assure you, your planet is insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Without the help of a superior race, you will never reach your full potential. You will remain lost in the shadows, struggling to make your mark on the galaxy." The room was silent. Corin could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. He knew he had just crossed a line, but in that moment, he didn't care. This was his chance to dominate the negotiations. The humans would understand the power they were dealing with. They would bow to the might of the Vasari. But then, unexpectedly, James Carver stood up. His calm gaze never left Corin. For a moment, Corin thought he had made a mistake, that James would respond with anger or fear. But instead, James simply nodded slowly, as though he was carefully weighing his next words. "We didn't come here to beg for your help, Corin," James said quietly, but with an intensity that sent a chill down Corin's spine. "We came here to discuss an equal partnership. You talk about your empire and your superiority, but it sounds to me like you think we're beneath you. That's a mistake." Corin blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift. This was not the response he had expected. The humans weren't reacting as he had imagined. They were not cowering or backing down. James' words were not filled with anger. They were filled with a quiet certainty. It was as if James was more certain of his place in the galaxy than Corin was of his own. Before Corin could respond, the woman who had warned him earlier spoke again. "You have made a grave mistake, Corin," she said, her voice steady. "You've broken the one rule that no one should ever forget. You've angered a human." Corin laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I am a Vasari ambassador. You cannot threaten me with such nonsense." James turned slowly, and for the first time, a small, knowing smile appeared on his face. "We didn't threaten you," he said. "We simply warned you. The universe has rules, and this is one you should have listened to." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The tension that had filled the space suddenly felt heavier, almost suffocating. Corin's mind raced. He had crossed a line. He had angered them, yes, but there was something else, something more dangerous in the way they reacted. It was as though the humans had been waiting for him to make this mistake, and now they were no longer in his control. He could sense the change in the room. Something was about to happen, something that Corin could not predict. The rules he had known for so long no longer applied here. He had made a mistake, and it was a mistake he would soon regret. The moment of no return. Corin felt a sense of unease settle into the pit of his stomach as the words of James Carver echoed in his mind. "You've angered a human." It seemed like a trivial statement at first. How could it matter? He was the ambassador of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Earth was nothing compared to the might of the Vasari. Yet as he looked around the room, he saw the faces of the humans, calm, confident, and strangely unafraid. Corin's mind raced. He had been trained for every diplomatic scenario possible, but this was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Earth's people weren't just standing their ground. They were waiting for something. He could feel it. They weren't afraid of the Vasari, and that fact made Corin more nervous than he had ever been in his life. James, still standing with that quiet smile, gestured toward the door. "I think it's time for you to leave. Ambassador, we've heard enough." Corin hesitated. The conversation hadn't gone as he had planned. The humans were stubborn and clearly more resilient than he had first assumed. He had pushed them too far, and now there was no going back. But he wasn't ready to admit defeat. Not yet. "I believe we're not done here," Corin said, trying to maintain his composure, but the sharpness in his tone betrayed his nervousness. "The Vasari Empire offers you more than you could ever achieve on your own. We've guided species far beyond where you stand now." "We don't need your guidance," James replied, his tone steady but filled with an unspoken certainty. "You're not the first to come here with promises, and you won't be the last." Corin, feeling the walls closing in on him, stood and turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, there was a sudden shift in the room. The air grew heavier, the silence more oppressive. Corin felt it. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a presence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Then he heard a sound, a low hum at first, faint but growing louder. He turned, confusion on his face, and saw the screens on the wall flicker to life. A bright red light flashed across the room, and Corin's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. The communications array was being activated. Corin's heart began to race. It was impossible. How could they have? Before he could finish his thought, a voice filled the room, smooth and clear, but with an edge of finality. It wasn't James Carver's voice, nor anyone from Earth that Corin had seen. This voice came from somewhere else, a voice of authority, a voice that made the Vasari ambassador's blood run cold. "This is Admiral Darius of the Vasari fleet. All communications to Ambassador Corin's ship have been severed. No response to commands will be acknowledged." Corin's mouth went dry. He tried to speak, to protest, but his voice caught in his throat. This wasn't possible. He had just spoken with his fleet. They should have been there to support him, to assist him in any way needed. But as he looked up at the screens, it became clear. Earth had done something he had never anticipated. His connection to his fleet, to his empire, was severed. In an instant, the Vasari ambassador realized that he was no longer in control of the situation. Before he could react further, a new image appeared on the screen. It was of a vast fleet, sleek, powerful, and unmistakably human. The ships were not large or intimidating in the way the Vasari fleet was, but there was something about their precision, their focus, that sent a chill down Corin's spine. The fleet began to move in unison, like a well-oiled machine. They moved with a purpose Corin had never seen before in any species. "Admiral Darius," Corin whispered under his breath. "What is this?" His question was met with another message. "The fleet is standing by, Ambassador. Earth is taking full control of the situation. The Vasari fleet will not be allowed to interfere. You have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." Corin's hands trembled as he stared at the screen. He could feel the weight of the consequences bearing down on him. This wasn't just a failed negotiation. This was something far more dangerous. The human fleet, though smaller than the Vasaris, had already positioned itself in such a way that Corin realized there was no escape. Earth wasn't relying on brute force like the Vasari did. They weren't depending on overwhelming numbers. Instead, they had orchestrated everything with a quiet, deadly precision. The message was clear. Humans could destroy you without you even knowing how it happened. Corin took a step back, his mind racing. How could this have happened? He had underestimated them. He had dismissed them as an insignificant species, yet they had just trapped him, cut off his connection to his empire, and neutralized his greatest strength. He had angered them. And now, there was no going back. He turned to face James Carver, whose expression was calm, almost serene. "I told you," James said, his voice carrying that same quiet certainty. "Never anger a human." Corin's knees felt weak as he took in the magnitude of what had just happened. The humans didn't need grand armies or terrifying weapons to win. They only needed to play by their own rules, and that was something the Vasari had never understood. The ambassador could feel his grip on reality slipping. The universe had just delivered its message in a way he could never have predicted. And in that moment, Corin understood. He was no longer in charge. The unexpected reaction. Corin stood frozen, staring at the screen as the image of the human fleet swirled in his mind. His heart raced, and his breath caught in his throat. He had expected resistance, perhaps some sort of negotiation, or even mild retaliation. But this was something else entirely. The humans had outplayed him, and now they held all the cards. For a moment, he thought he was trapped in some kind of nightmare. The Vasari Empire had been the galaxy's dominant power for centuries. It had crushed countless species in its wake, forged countless alliances, and left a trail of defeated civilizations behind it. Yet here he was, on Earth, surrounded by humans, completely at their mercy. James Carver remained calm, his eyes never leaving Corin. His expression was almost sympathetic, but there was no mistaking the quiet authority in his voice when he spoke again. "You should have listened, Ambassador. You should have realized the humans don't play by the same rules as everyone else. Your empire has its strength, but so do we." Corin struggled to find his words. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. James smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We want what we've always wanted: respect. We want to be treated as equals, not pawns in some galactic game of power. And we'll do whatever it takes to ensure that happens." Corrin could feel his mind spinning. What did James mean? He didn't fully understand the implications of this moment, how a simple exchange had spiraled into an unimaginable shift in power. The ambassador had always thought humans to be naive, even foolish. But now, standing before him, he realized how wrong he had been. The woman from earlier, who had warned Corrin about angering humans, stepped forward. She was quiet, but there was an edge of finality in her voice as she addressed him. "You've been given a gift, Corrin," she said, "the opportunity to learn. The opportunity to leave here with your life and your pride intact. Take it before it's too late." Corrin blinked, processing her words. What gift? What was she talking about? He had been arrogant. He had crossed a line he didn't understand. The humans were giving him an opportunity now, a chance to walk away from this disaster with some shred of dignity. But Corrin wasn't sure if he could. The Vesari ambassador's pride was at the core of his identity, and admitting defeat was a bitter pill to swallow. How could he leave now, after everything? Could he really accept that a species like humanity, one he had considered beneath him, had just brought the mighty Vesari Empire to its knees? As the silence stretched, the weight of the decision grew heavier. But then something unexpected happened. James's voice broke through the tension again, this time softer, almost gentle. "We're not your enemies, Corrin. You don't need to be afraid of us. But you do need to understand. The universe isn't just about power. It's about how you use that power, how you choose to treat those around you." Corrin's eyes narrowed, confusion clouding his thoughts. "What are you saying? How is any of this about power if you're controlling my fleet, my communications, everything?" James sighed and took a step closer, his gaze never leaving Corrin's. "It's not about controlling you, Ambassador. It's about reminding you of something. The universe is vast, but there are limits even for the most powerful. You think you can conquer it all, but power isn't everything. We don't need to destroy you, Corrin. We only need you to understand what it means to live in the galaxy with others." Corrin opened his mouth, but no words came out. He didn't understand. He couldn't. The Vesari Empire had always been about dominance and strength. The idea that the humans didn't need to prove their superiority through force, it was alien to him. But something in James's eyes made him pause. The human leader was not showing the same anger or bloodlust that Corrin had expected. Instead, he was offering something else, an opportunity for peace, for understanding. The woman who had spoken earlier, the one who had warned him about angering humans, now addressed him directly. Her voice was firm, but without malice. "You have no idea what you've started, Ambassador. The universe isn't a game where the strongest always win. The humans have something that no other species can take away: resilience. They can survive anything, adapt to anything. And once you realize that, once you understand that, you'll know the true meaning of power." Corrin stared at her, a spark of realization flickering in his mind. It wasn't about domination. It wasn't about crushing others to prove strength. It was something more. It was something he had overlooked in his arrogance. The humans didn't fight with weapons alone. They fought with their spirit, their refusal to be broken. Suddenly, Corrin understood. Earth wasn't just a small, insignificant planet. It was a world that had survived against all odds, a world that had shown time and time again that no matter how strong the enemy, no matter how impossible the situation, humanity always found a way to rise again. This was what James Carver had meant all along. The Vesari Empire might have been powerful, but in the end, strength wasn't what would define the galaxy. The ability to survive, to adapt, to stand tall in the face of insurmountable odds, that was what made humans so dangerous. And that was what Corrin had angered. The consequences unfold. Corin's mind raced as the full weight of his mistake finally began to settle over him. The words of James Carver and the woman, the warning about humanity's resilience, had finally broken through his arrogance. The Vasari had always been about power and control, but it was clear now that the humans weren't interested in dominating the galaxy in the same way. They didn't need to. They had something far more dangerous, an unyielding will to survive. As the human fleet hovered above, its ships now forming an impenetrable wall around Earth, Corin could feel the ground shifting beneath him. The situation was spiraling out of control. No matter what he did, he could not undo the damage he had caused. And the humans weren't letting him off the hook. James Carver's voice once again echoed in the room, breaking the silence that had hung heavy in the air. "We gave you a choice, Ambassador," he said. "You could have walked away with your dignity, but you chose to ignore the rule, and now you'll have to face the consequences." Corin's eyes darted around, searching for some escape, some way out of this mess, but it was too late. There was nowhere to run. He was trapped on Earth, with no way to communicate with his fleet or any of his people. The Vasari Empire, which had been invincible for centuries, had been reduced to a shadow of its former self in just a few short hours. But what scared Corin the most was the fact that the humans weren't acting out of anger or revenge. There was no fury in their eyes, only a quiet resolve. They didn't need to destroy him. They had already won. As Corin struggled to comprehend what was happening, the woman who had warned him earlier approached him. "It's not too late for you to learn, Corin. It's not too late to understand why humans are different. Your mistake wasn't just angering us. It was failing to realize that we don't fear death. We faced it time and time again, and we've survived every time. That's why we're dangerous. That's why you should have never underestimated us." Corin's chest tightened as her words sank in. The realization struck him like a blow to the head. The Vasari had always believed in the power of their fleets, the might of their military force. They had believed that strength and technology could solve everything. But humans fought with something far more powerful, an unrelenting spirit that refused to be broken. He thought back to the way Earth had dealt with countless threats over the years. From the earliest days of human civilization to their wars and conflicts, humanity had never been defeated, not permanently, at least. Even when faced with insurmountable odds, humans always found a way to rise again. They had fought for their survival with everything they had, and they never, ever gave up. Corin now understood that it wasn't power that made them dangerous. It was their spirit, their refusal to be crushed. "You'll see," the woman continued, her voice almost gentle now. "You've just been shown the true face of humanity, and the consequences of your actions will echo through the stars." Corin was speechless. The full weight of the universe seemed to come crashing down on him. He had thought that the Vasari were the galaxy's most powerful species, but now he realized that power meant nothing if you didn't have the will to fight and survive. The Vasari had built an empire on control and dominance, but they had never faced a species like this before, one that wasn't afraid to fight back, no matter the cost. The room fell silent again. Corin stood there, his mind numb, unable to form words. He had angered the humans, yes, but worse, he had underestimated them. And now his empire would pay the price. Far above, in the stars, Corin knew that the Vasari fleet had been crippled. The message had been sent. No one was going to come to his rescue. The humans had severed his communications, and his ship was stranded on Earth. He was alone, a prisoner of his own arrogance. He realized with cold clarity that the Vasari Empire would not be the ones dictating terms any longer. The humans had already won. They had shown him the true power of their resilience. And now, Corin had to face the harsh truth. The universe had one rule, and it was one the Vasari had foolishly ignored. Never anger a human. James Carver's voice broke through Corin's thoughts one last time. "Your people will learn this lesson the hard way. As for you, Ambassador, I think it's time for you to reflect on your actions." Corin swallowed hard, his pride shattered. He had thought he was invincible, but now he saw the truth. There were forces far greater than any empire, and humanity was one of them. The room went dark, and Corrin was left standing there, a broken man, his future uncertain, his empire's fate sealed by a single deadly mistake. The final revelation. Corrin stood in the darkness of the room, the weight of the universe pressing down on him. His pride, once so firm and unwavering, had crumbled. The power of the Vesari Empire, the empire he had devoted his life to, felt distant and insignificant now. He had been brought to Earth as an ambassador, a representative of the galaxy's mightiest race. And now he was nothing more than a prisoner, caught in a trap of his own making. The silence was suffocating. Corrin's thoughts churned as he tried to understand what had just happened. How could he have been so blind? The humans hadn't needed overwhelming power or weaponry. They hadn't needed to destroy him or even his fleet. All they had needed was their resilience, that unshakable will to survive, to adapt, to endure. James Carver's words echoed in Corrin's mind. We gave you a choice, but you chose to ignore the rule. And now you'll face the consequences. It wasn't just the Vesari that had failed to understand the humans. It was every species that had underestimated them. Corrin had thought they were weak, a species to be manipulated. But the truth was that humans were more dangerous than any weapon, any fleet, or any empire. The Vesari had believed in strength, but they hadn't counted on the fact that power didn't always win wars. Resilience did. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. Corrin blinked against the sudden brightness, trying to clear the fog from his mind. In front of him stood James Carver, and beside him, the woman who had first warned Corrin about angering humans. James looked at Corrin with something akin to pity, but there was no softness in his expression. His gaze was firm, unwavering, the look of someone who had seen countless struggles and faced unimaginable challenges. He spoke again, his voice steady but laced with an undeniable weight. You've learned, haven't you? James asked quietly. It wasn't about power, Corrin. It was never about power. Corrin opened his mouth to speak but stopped, unsure of what to say. What could he say? His arrogance had led him to make a mistake so monumental that it could not be undone. His empire, his people, were now caught in the consequences of his actions. The woman stepped forward, her expression grave. The universe has a way of balancing things, Corrin. You came here thinking you could control us, but you learned the hard way that the universe doesn't bow to those who think they can dominate it. The humans, we've faced extinction countless times, but we've always survived. And now, you know why. Corrin lowered his gaze. He had been warned, but he hadn't listened. And now he was paying the price. James Carver stepped closer, his voice calm but resolute. The Vesari will learn what you've learned. They will understand that the power to dominate others doesn't make you invincible. It's the strength to endure, to survive against all odds, that truly defines a species. Corrin finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. I was wrong. The words felt foreign on his tongue. He had always believed in the superiority of his race, the strength of the Vesari. But now, faced with the consequences of his pride, he could only admit his mistake. I underestimated you. James nodded, his face softening slightly. And you're not the first, Corrin. Many others have come before you, thinking they could control humanity. They all learned the same lesson. Don't make the same mistake again. Corrin's heart sank as the finality of his situation hit him. His empire was no longer the power it once was. The humans had shown that there were forces far beyond brute strength, and they had made it clear that they would not be ruled, manipulated, or dominated. Humanity had carved out its place in the universe, and anyone who tried to stand in their way would learn just how dangerous that resolve could be. James turned to leave the room, the woman following him. As they reached the door, James paused and glanced back at Corrin. You can leave Earth when you're ready, Ambassador. But know this, your empire will never be the same. The universe is changing. And now you'll see just how humans fit into that change. Corin stood there, his mind still reeling. He wanted to argue, to challenge the humans, to claim that the Vezari were far from defeated. But deep down, he knew the truth. The Vezari had no power here. The humans had shown him that. And with that knowledge, Corin understood something else. The universe had one rule, and it was one that even the greatest of empires could not ignore. Never anchor a human.